What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel, The Jewish Catholic. If you are watching this right now, it's most likely on the already pre-recorded version, but if you're joining us live, welcome. I'm gonna go ahead and check that everything is a go, and it looks like it is. All right. All right, folks, once again, let me welcome you to The Jewish Catholic. It's been a while since I have a guest over in my channel, but today we have somebody special. You probably already saw, if you saw the thumbnail. There's going to be more details also in the description box later on. As for now, I'm just grateful to be back here. If you don't know why I've been so absent, is because I have a newborn baby. I guess now it's been a couple of months, but it's been a lot of work. This is my second child, and I just wanted to take some time to devote myself to my family. I'm sure many of you understand that's a huge priority, huge importance. But now we're back as we're starting. My wife and I are getting a hang of everything and learning how to do all this parenting thing, because I guess there's no real book that's gonna teach you what it's really like. You can only know once you're there. But let's go ahead and jump into the matter. I'm sure you're all waiting as much as I am to dig into this conversation, and I'm going to be introducing our guest in just a moment. We're just going to go ahead and roll the intro, and then we shall begin with that. Let's go. And we are back. Welcome everyone once again to the Jewish Catholic. For today's video, we're going to be being joined by a good friend of mine that I met through Instagram, and his name is Clyde. Let's bring him on right now. My buddy Clyde, let me unmute him. And Clyde, how are you, my brother?
I'm good. How are you? Good to be back.
I'm great, and it's good to have you here once again. It's been a long time. Do you remember when we last spoke?
I think it was last summer.
Really, that's actually a lot worse than I thought. I thought you were gonna be like, oh, it was like 2 months ago. But yeah, last summer.
No,
It's been a while, man. A long time.
I mean we talk outside of YouTube, but the last
So
video that we've done together was last summer.
wow, yeah. So it definitely has been a while. But you reached out to me in a time when I was wanting to reach out to you. I know that we've been trying to get on a video, especially with our mutual friend Gabriel, and we wanted to do a video talking about several things. One of the things that we all have in common is the love for Asia, uh, partially because I live in Asia, and well, Gabriel is Asian, and you because you love the culture.
Oh
But
my
I
God.
think that's a video that we still have in the works that we're gonna be bringing out. Outside of that, this video that we're gonna have today, as many of our viewers saw, is about evangelism. And this is a big topic that I feel that is very important to talk about, and I think you are probably the perfect person to talk about, because both of us were not born into Catholicism. And it's funny because if I'm not mistaken, we're going to dive into this in a second, but from my part, nobody from the Catholic Church ever tried to get me into the church. It was by my own research, when I was actually trying to debunk the church, that I ended up going into the history, going into Jewish literature, and all of those things linked together, and voila, here I am, almost confirmed Catholic. I'm in the works. You've been Catholic for I don't know how many years now?
Almost 3 years. This Easter Sunday will be officially 3 years.
Amazing. So, I mean, but believers in Yeshua, as for myself, I think I could say that I was raised in the faith, even though I didn't take my relationship with God and Yeshua, I didn't take it seriously. I want to say maybe until my late teens. But you were also still Christian before becoming Catholic. And how long was that for?
I was an evangelical for 21 years of my life. In your case, no one taught me about Catholicism at all. I had to do the research on my own. And it was unfortunate because in the back of my mind, I thought that a lot of Catholics were going to be evangelizing me. But it turned out really it was the other way around. Not to say that there weren't Catholics later on that helped me along the way, but in the initial part of me coming into the church and because this was like a no one really taught me anything. I kid you not, over the years I've watched hundreds of video Catholic YouTube videos, well not just on YouTube but on different platforms. I've read hundreds of books, hundreds of articles, you name it, and I'm not joking. When I mean hundreds, it's hundreds. Because I wanted, because even though I wasn't anti Catholic personally, I wanted to know what was the actual truth. And instead of me wanting to listen to what my pastors had to say, what my non Catholic former friends had to say, what my family had to say about the church, I did the research on my own. And here I am today, and I have no regrets.
Well, in both of our stories, as we have clearly noted, nobody really reached out to us, and it was in our pursuit of truth that we ended up where we are. Unfortunately, we live in a world where much people aren't really concerned with what's the truth. As a matter of fact, as many folks out there would be aware of, nowadays one of the common phrases that you hear is, my truth is blah, blah, blah. This is about my truth. Truth is subjective, this and that. A lot of people don't believe that there is such a thing as a universal truth. And thus, they're not really looking for what we would know as truth, which in turn actually equals to God Himself. So let's dive into this whole matter of evangelism. Both of us were not really faced by it, but I'm going to share one story about how when I was back in my Protestant days, I did dive into the world of evangelism. So, number one, it started when I was very young. I actually attended a private Baptist school when I was younger. And this was the same place where I was actually baptized as a Christian. Um, when I was there, I was very, very young. I think I was maybe 11, 12, give or take. Yeah, I think I was about 11. And I remember one of the big things that this church used to do is literally go dressed up in a white shirt and tie. You got your slacks, you got your nice shoes, carry your Bible with you, and you're going from door to door. I kid you not, like Latter day Saints people. What are those guys called? I forgot what they're called. The Mormons.
The Mormons.
Yeah. Just like that, except without the name tag. And we would
I
go
was
door
just
to door.
about to ask you, did you wear a name?
No, no, no name tag. And not to bust on these guys. At least they're chasing what they think is true, right? And they're trying to promote it, regardless whether it's truth or not. That's not what I'm trying to say. Is the fact that they were actually going out. So this is what we did. Um, okay, so sorry, I was just checking in the comments because apparently my audio was wrong, but our boy Gabriel hooked me up and he let me know that my audio was trash. So hopefully now it's good. Um, anyway, going back to the story, we used to go door to door and asking people, "Are you saved?" That's the we now know that there's that's not the right question to be asking anyway. But regardless, this is what we did, and the intentions were good. We wanted to get souls for the sake of the kingdom, get people to know Christ. All well and done. Later on, when I was part of a Protestant church, a Pentecostal church, that was another thing that we did. At first, it wasn't something that was quite common with that church in particular, but then we started becoming a little bit more outgoing and we started interacting with the community. And I remember that whenever there would be like festivals or stuff like that, or those sales that, what are they called? Do you know what those shops are? I don't remember anymore because I haven't been in the States for so long. But basically, they shut down a street and they have like a bunch of stores everywhere, like little markets. What is that
Oh,
called?
you mean it's not a fair. I know what you're talking about
You
because
know what I
you
mean?
definitely see those in like mall areas and like
Yeah.
downtown areas.
Yeah,
I
exactly
can't
like it
remember
down to
the
that.
actual name, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So in those type of events, I remember that the youth of the church would go out again carrying their Bible. This time, no tie, no white shirt. You were just wearing whatever, and you will go out and just tell people, "Hey, do you know about Jesus?" Or, "Hey, can we pray for you?" Stuff like that. The reason why I'm saying all of this story is because I actually remember this one time in front of a Catholic church, and I met a lady who was Catholic, like a much older lady. And I'm like, "Hey, do you know about Jesus?" And she says, "Yes, I'm Catholic." And I said, "Oh, so you don't really know Jesus?"
Oh no.
In my ignorance,
Oh no.
sorry, sorry. This is what it was.
Mm, I felt that
Yeah,
cringe
yeah.
just
I mean,
right
I feel
now.
embarrassed almost saying it, but in reality, again, looking back at those times, I had no ill intention. I was just misinformed. So when I approached this lady and I was like, "Oh, but let's look at the Bible," she refused. She's like, "I don't want to look. I don't want to look. Like I don't have time. I gotta go. I gotta go." And then she left. And I remember I was talking to somebody about her, and I'm like, "Do you think that person's gonna go to hell? They say they know Jesus." And they're like, "Look, we don't know. She might be." And I'm like, "Well, she seemed like a good lady. Maybe she'll go to heaven." Like, I'm making my own judgment on this lady. I have no idea about whether she's living by faith and keeping the commandments and frequenting all the sacraments and whatever. I didn't know any of that stuff. But in my mind, for some reason, to this day, that lady is stuck in my head because I was always wondering, wow, this lady was so firm. But at the same time, what was weird to me is that she didn't even want to give me time to talk. So, did you ever experience anything like that? Like, did you ever try to convert Catholics, quote unquote?
Never. Me
Mm-hmm.
personally, never. Because, like I said, at a young age, when I was discovering more about Catholicism, and I don't want to be mean when I say this, but I felt the religion that I was in was more repulsive in the sense that I knew, not entirely, but I knew something was not right.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I was forced in various ways to do street evangelism and a lot of stuff because, as you know, I was raised a Seventh day Adventist. And if you already know that the Seventh day Adventists are one of the fastest growing Protestant denominations in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And you may know that they do a lot of evangelism efforts. And when I was doing those things, again, I never felt comfortable doing because I felt like what I was saying, I wasn't really saying anything to the people that I was quote unquote evangelizing. I was just there minding my own business with my Bible, handing out Adventist stuff to folks on like the markets and stuff. But I never felt comfortable because
Mm-hmm.
something in the back of my mind was telling me that this wasn't right.
Right.
And of course, I'm not questioning the individual sincerity of the evangelicals or anyone,
Mm-hmm.
but when you had an encounter with Catholicism or respond to the graces that God has been giving you when you open your eyes and realize that something's not right, you realize that any religion that does not have the fullness of the truth will have little holes or little inconsistencies in them. And by the grace of God, if you're able to figure out those and look at those inconsistencies and those little holes, you realize that those particular beliefs that you once held or that everyone continues to hold does not go in line with what scripture says or what history
Mm-hmm.
tells you. The like I said, every time I did Adventist evangelism, like I never felt comfortable, and
Right.
many people noticed that, and it was for a time, and then they just told me just don't bother coming back doing evangelism
Right.
because it doesn't look like you're in the mood to do it.
Right. Right.
And so I was like, is this an answer to my prayers? And I'm like, it could be. Thank you, God.
You got freed. You got freed from that burden. Uh, looking at both of our stories, we can see that although we ended up in Catholicism in very much in similar ways, We also had a different perspective on outreach. And for me, even from the Baptist church that I was attending, and then later in the Pentecostal one, outreach seemed to be something that was important. In your case, even though you're saying Seventh-day Adventists are one of the fastest growing, and I have an idea of why that is, we'll talk about that in another video.
Oh yeah.
I think it's interesting that it's fast growing and you were a member of that, but you still didn't feel like you had to. How do you feel now as a Catholic in regards to the importance, not necessarily about your, like, oh, this is my mission, I have to be an evangelizing person, but how do you feel as a Catholic? Do you feel the same, that you still don't feel comfortable, or is it something that you feel that you're a little bit more willing to do?
As a Catholic now, it's more comfortable. Not actually. Let me rephrase that. It's more natural for me to evangelize
Mm.
because the way that Catholics evangelize is completely different than the way evangelicals evangelize. And throughout history, not to say that Catholics never done street preaching or whatnot, they've done, but obviously it was done through the missionaries and stuff like that, especially around nations where the population was both semi-Catholic and semi-pagan or secular or whatnot.
Hmm.
But one of the ways that Catholics, actually, let me rephrase that again, Catholics don't really need to do door to door evangelism or do outreach because everything that we do, all the signs of the externals, the acts, pretty much everything that we do in our daily lives as Catholics is a sign of evangelism, is a sign of outreach
Hmm.
because signs signify reality. And if people are willing to, if people notice the things that you do outside of, your preaching and everything, like
Hmm.
how you talk, how you behave, why you go to church, what what do these things in Catholicism mean? Those are, in a sense, acts of evangelism because
Hmm.
what you do and what the church has done through for almost 2,000 years in terms of how she was able to preach the gospel to all the nations, that is what I call true evangelism because all the things that we've done points help people lead themselves toward the objective truth.
Right, right. So I have a question, and I just want to make sure that I'm getting this clear. Basically, you feel more comfortable when it comes to evangelism, but you're saying that it looks different in the way that a Catholic does it because there are so many outward signs which are not necessarily to portray yourself like, oh, look at how holy I am, but rather that's how you live out your faith, and naturally that reflects, and that's a form of evangelism. Is that correct? Am I getting that
It
right?
leads it leads people to divine mysteries. It
Okay.
leads people to eventually, God willing, to respond to the graces that God will give them.
Okay. Now,
That's what happened to me, and that
mhm,
definitely happened to you.
I'm gonna bust your chops a little bit here, and I'm also gonna
All right?
bust my own chops because I understand what you're
Okay.
saying, but at the same time, I feel that there is more to it, and I'll say this: going back to what we were talking about before, for you and I know many other people that fall into the same category, like for example, Keith Nestor is a great example of this.
Mhm.
We are the type of people that just want truth. And as a matter
Mhm.
of fact, another person that I had as a guest in this channel, Roy Schumann, who is also another Jewish Catholic, he put it this way: I go where God is. It doesn't matter what it looks like or people say. And that hit me because I understand about the importance about searching for truth, but a lot of people don't. And this is one of the things that we mentioned earlier, especially this generation that we're living in. And that also leads me into what evangelism looks like nowadays. You evangelize in a way by being exposing your faith, if you will, in social media, right? You don't have a YouTube channel, but you have a pretty amazing Instagram. And just shameless plug to my friend Clyde's Instagram is right there in the bottom, is at Latin Catholicism. Make sure to follow him on Instagram. But there, one of the reasons I followed you is because of the fact that you were sharing the faith, and you were not just in an echo chamber talking to Catholics, you're talking to people that don't necessarily agree with you. So, all that to say that I think even though you did say that living out your faith like in the regular way, every Catholic is technically evangelizing. But I think there is more that has to be done, and I think you're already doing it. And I pray to God that that's what I'm doing through my social media, Instagram, YouTube. But I think still that we cannot neglect what we have seen through history. And I see a comment here by one of my good friends. His name is Saint Isabel, the miracle worker, right? Says Catholics were themselves out evangelizing the world in the first 1,500 years of Christianity. Then we sort of rested for too long. And I tend to agree with that. I think, look, for example, I think for you it's still the feast of St. Patrick, right? Right now?
No, that was yesterday.
Oh, I'm all over the place. For me, I guess yeah, you're right because you're already in the morning. So
Yep.
St. Patrick's Day, as the world knows him, the real St.
Hmm.
Patrick, he was famous for basically converting Ireland into the gospel, right? To knowing Yeshua, knowing the Messiah, and that's crazy. Like, how many people do you know personally who have gone to a country that is lost or not knowing Yeshua, and then all of a sudden all of these people are building monasteries, people are becoming monks, people are becoming priests. We don't see that anymore. But I
Except through
think,
the evangelicals.
right, exactly. But I think, and maybe you agree with me, or maybe you have a different take, but I think it's about time that Catholics kind of get that type of momentum again, which is okay, we do live out the faith and that kind of speaks out to people, but there's more to it. Yes, you can do, the young people, like for example, our other mutual friend, Amber Rose, she has podcasts, she has YouTube, she has Instagram, she has even TikTok, which I'm not that courageous to dive into that crazy world.
Uh,
I see your face and you're like, TikTok.
just hearing TikTok, I just want to put a bag over my head and just go to the corner and just cry.
Yeah, and but look, at least she's doing that, and that's what I mean. And in this world that we live in now, it's different. So, what do you feel? Do you think that it's time for Catholics to do that, or do you think there's another technique? And also, real quick, before I hand it to you, I just want to say shalom to our friend over here, Rabbi Eduardo. Shalom. We still gotta talk.
Shalom.
Anyway, go ahead and answer that. What do you think? What's your position on what I just mentioned? Is it time?
Well,
Or do
I
we have another
agree.
technique?
I wholeheartedly agree with you. And I think I didn't make myself clear in my previous statement, but I'm not against the idea of Catholics, going out there evangelizing like the evangelicals do. But obviously, what I was basically saying is just the way that Catholics do evangelism, outward evangelism, is very different to what evangelicals do.
Hmm.
Um, to go back to your question, I wholeheartedly agree that Catholics need to actually start literally evangelizing because the West didn't convert just by Catholics just sitting around doing nothing.
Hmm.
Western civilization wasn't Christianized because the individuals that held on to the Christian faith sat down and did nothing.
Hmm.
There was evangelism. People spoke. People did things. People were willing to give their lives for the sake of dying
Yes.
for Christ and his church. And through these sacrifices that these missionaries and saints and priests, bishops, and many Catholics have done over the centuries, we have the world that we have today in terms of remnant. And when I mean that, I mean all the little remnants that we have left of Catholicism in the world. We have those because the people that built this civilization, built Western civilization in other nations, gave their lives for the truth.
Right.
And so, in an age of relativism and secularism, and people are, and when people saying that my truth is no better than yours, this is something that unfortunately we as Catholics are heavily responsible, because by us keeping our mouth shut for the sake of a temporal peace,
Mm.
we in turn created a society in which the whole, as long as you believe in what you want to believe, that's all that matters.
Right.
And look where that's gotten us today. I kid
Exactly.
you not. Society is the reason why society is the way it is today, not just in America, but in pretty much almost the whole world, is because we have allowed too much false ecumenism to take over our lives.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. And I think this ecumenism thing, so basically listening to others, conversing with others, there is some good in the idea of it. For example, Shaul himself, Paul, when he would go to the churches that were filled with the Greeks and the Jews and perhaps other people that
Mhm.
were from the Gentile nations, they were mixed. That's some form of ecumenism, right? They're talking,
Yep.
they're conversing, they're learning. But there's one difference that I see there from what we see now, which is what you are probably saying, which is the fact that we have allowed that to morph into I'm not going to speak the truth anymore. I'm just going to listen to what everybody else has to say so that I look friendly in front of them. And now we're no longer the bold Christians that are willing to give their lives for our Lord. Now we're the people that, wow, look, Clyde is so nice. He listens to me. Instead of being like, yo, Clyde is that guy that spits fire. He offended me, but at least he's standing his ground. Like, we don't see that
Mhm.
anymore.
No, we don't, because, like I mentioned, it all boils down to, it really boils down to human respect.
Mm.
When you mention St. Paul, while it's true he was friendly with though with the Gentiles, and especially with the Greeks and the Romans, do not get me wrong, he studied philosophy, and when he was evangelizing Greece, what he was basically doing is he basically acknowledged the truth that was within the philosophies that the Greeks believed in
Right.
and what the Romans believed in, but he never ever conformed to their ideology, in the sense that he basically told them that their beliefs are true, nor did he tell them that they should remain where they are.
Yep.
What St. Paul was basically doing is telling, hey, you with what you've been saying, you can really be speaking objectively if you acknowledge that there's a supreme deity somewhere
Right.
and you have different gods out there,
Right.
then you have to acknowledge that something's not right.
Mm.
Let
That's actually
me
good.
let
Sorry.
me acknowledge let, basically what St. Paul is basically saying, let me give you the fullness of the truth. You have some truth, but let me offer you something that you've never experienced
That's beautiful. Man, sorry that I interrupted you, but that's just
before.
it's so big and that's absolutely true. And it makes me remember of that instance where he goes to the Athenians and he sees, for example, that altar to the unknown god, and he even uses their own poetry. He uses the poets to kind of be like, okay, you're talking about these things, you're talking about the unknown god, okay, let me show you who that god is. And that's the distinction. And again, you keep hitting the nail on the head. What is it? It's going to folks that aren't necessarily acquainted with the truth, and you see what they have and you use that as a vehicle to bring him towards you, not the other way around, not you using those things and applying it to you. And I think that is the big mistake that we're doing now. And right now I'm probably going to offend some people, but this is what I mean when it comes to meditation and mindfulness. If you pay attention, if you pay attention, now there's a lot of Christians starting to do that stuff, getting into astrology, getting into palm reading, and getting into these things. Why?
Sync-
Do you understand what I'm talking about? It's like people. see things that we could kind of use it for them. Like, okay, they're speaking to the dead. Okay, yeah, you can speak to somebody who you thought was there. Like when it comes to talking to the saints, for example, many people think like,
Yes.
oh, somebody that passed, they're dead, and then we can reveal to them that they're, if they were holy people that were in communion with Christ, they're actually more alive, right? So you could use that as a vehicle to show them the actual truth. But what we're doing, when I say we, I mean the people that are partaking of this weakness, is taking these things, and instead of bringing the truth to the people, they want to apply that to the faith. And I think that's the big issue of what's happening. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's so important to evangelize within the church. But at the same time, it's also time for us to evangelize outward. So before we continue into in this conversation, in particular this piece, my next question to you: what do you think should be our main focus, if there even is a requirement for a main focus? Should we be addressing dormant Catholics? Should we be addressing Protestants? Or should we be addressing atheists? And if it's all of them, is there a priority? How do you see this?
Them, because, well, all of them, but the first priority should be with Catholics, because if you don't wake up the people that are supposed to be on your side, how are you supposed to win the battle?
Mm, okay.
And I want to get into a little bit of history, and whenever I do a lot of live streams of Gabriel, I always go into a lot of history, and I always blow his mind. If he's still watching, he can confirm this. But if you take a look at a history of Catholic evangelization, you notice worldwide that it kind of, not to say that it died down, but it is not as effective as it was many centuries ago,
Mm,
especially in the United States of America. And I did kind of talked about this last year with Gabriel, with the whole Kennedy Biden Catholicism kind of stuff, but I'll give you a little recap.
yeah.
Basically, as you may know, Catholics in America were persecuted in various different ways in the states, as from the foundation of the colonies, from Declaration of Independence, all the way until around like the 1900s or so. During that time, many American Catholics, not all, but I argue most, for the sake of having a temporal peace with their Protestant brethren, they did not evangelize. They instead conformed with the society, embraced a lot of the errors during their time, and they pretty much got along to get along. And while it is true that the Catholic Church in America did a lot of good, nevertheless, the church in America has failed, because the reason why America is in a state that it is in today is because Catholics have failed their one of their prime missions, and that is to evangelize.
Hmm.
And I argue, because I studied a lot of American history, and I can point out various opportunities that Catholics had the opportunity to convert America.
Hmm.
And one of those moments, I argue, would have been the with the presidency of John F. Kennedy.
Hmm.
But instead of embracing his Catholicism, he decided to go along with the crowd and said, "My Catholicism will have no influence on the politics."
Right, right.
And many people, especially while he was in office when he met Pope St. Paul VI, um, many people, when he was about to meet him, many people were insulting him, were being disrespectful to him, saying that he's going to meet the Antichrist, all that stuff. And they were wondering if John F. Kennedy was going to kiss the ring. And when he met Paul VI, instead of being a humble, obedient son to his benevolent Holy Father, by kissing his ring, he shook his hand. Why did he shake his
Wow.
hand? Not because not because he really he respected Paul VI,
Hmm.
but he really cared about what other people thought about him.
Mm, right. Yeah.
And so from that moment forward, with the presidency of John F. Kennedy afterwards, you tended to see not only the way that Catholic politicians are today because they really modeled after John F. Kennedy with their quote unquote Catholicism. But
Right.
the opportunity for influential Catholics or Catholics that had a major voice to evangelize really go went on the lines of as long as you're a good person, that's all that matters.
Hmm.
And with the advent of both World War One and World War Two, you kind of saw, the unification of everyone, regardless of race, religion, class, um, education, you name it. And with those major events that happen, you tended to see most Catholics stop the need of evangelizing because, the world really much became one after those terrible events. But at the same time, like, if you really think about it, like, sure, like everyone came together, but you really didn't do the mission that Christ commanded you, not
Right.
asked of you, but demanded of you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so you see the idea of going along to get along doesn't work out in the end because at the end of the day, no matter what society you belong to, there will always be something that you will objectively disagree on.
Right.
And for you to say that it doesn't matter what truth is or my truth is no better than yours, deep down, you know that's not true.
Right. Man, that it's painful to hear because if we go back, and one of the things that I'm just going to go back to another comment that Saint Charbel, the miracle worker, mentioned in the comment section was the fact that, and let me see if I can pull it up. Hold on. He was talking about India, and yeah, okay, I'm pulling this up. I don't know why for some reason my text stuff is looking humongous and it's all over the place. So let me try to fix that. Okay. So he's talking about the fact that St. Thomas the Apostle single-handedly converted Iraq and India, and the 20 million Catholics in India are known as Thomas Christians. And then somebody else who I think is from Iraq ended up confirming that.
Yep.
Let me see. Yeah, I think it's from, yeah, Iraqi Catholic mentions, yeah, I agree. That's exactly what happened. And
Yep.
calls him a powerhouse. It's crazy. It's crazy to think that from the apostles and through the ages, Catholics were powerful. Look, I'm a living testimony of it here in Japan. Not the fact that
Hmm.
I'm not Japanese, but my wife is. But I can see the heritage, even though that Japan itself is world renowned for being not that religious. There's a lot of evidence of what used to be. And this,
Yes.
before the 1960s, it was quite
Hmm.
prevalent. Actually, before, and it's funny that you mentioned the world wars because that's when everything started shifting here. As a
Yep.
matter of fact, Japan used to be a huge place for evangelism. But if we go way back to the time of the samurai, there were people, the Jesuits, especially what I call the good
Yep.
Jesuits, they came over here and they evangelized and they were martyred. They were tortured
They were
for,
tortured, and mhm.
yeah,
And
like,
if I'm not mistaken, in Japan, it wasn't until much later that no, there was a law that I think it was like Catholics were put under the death penalty
yeah,
if they were evangelizing. If I'm not mistaken, and if I'm also not mistaken, hubs, one of the biggest hubs in Catholicism in Japan was Hiroshima and Nagasaki. If I'm not mistaken, right?
yep, that's exactly correct. Exactly correct. And there is actually a miracle story about that. That after
Yep,
it
I
was
know.
bombed, the priest survived. It's crazy. So people should research that. But yeah, you're
Oh yeah.
absolutely right. This was a center for Catholicism, and somebody even mentioned that it was Saint Maximilian Kolbe that visited Japan as well. And
And
it's crazy to think that these Catholics coming in from other countries, not knowing the language perfectly, came in, learned the language, evangelized, people gave their lives. But how many Catholics can we count now that are willing to be so bold about their faith? All of
Very
that
few.
not all of that not to bash Catholics. All of this, the purpose of this whole live stream is to remind Catholics what our history is. Where do we come from and where we should be going? And one of the major reasons why I really wanted to talk about this is because if you take a moment to look around what's going on in the world right now, I mean, I'm not one of those guys that says the end of the world is here. But let's be serious, it doesn't look that nice either. This is the first time in the world where the first time in history where the world is so connected, where technology is booming the way it is, where international governments are collaborating, doing all types of craziness. We're in the midst of war all around the world. So things don't look good. And it doesn't matter if it's the end or not. We don't know when our end will be or when your neighbor's end will be. And what are we doing to reach the souls? So the point of this live stream is really to encourage us, to remind us of where we came from and point us to where we want to go. With that being said, Clyde, do you mind if we go ahead and dive into some of the questions we got on Instagram?
Of course.
All right. So to begin, I don't know how many questions you got. I didn't get that many because I just posted that earlier today.
Mhm.
But let's go ahead and begin with the first question. We're going to try to go through these quickly because I'm guessing you probably have some questions too. And
Yeah.
I just have a couple, but let's go ahead and go through them. The first one is, again, these are coming in from Instagram, guys. If you're not following us on Instagram, the handles are right there. Mine is the Jewish Catholic, and Clyde is over at Latin Catholicism. So make sure to follow us there so that you can partake in these things, asking us questions. First one is coming in from at Robert.Rodriguez01. He says, do you guys consider outreach to Protestants evangelism? And I would say yes, because of the same
Yes.
thing that you spoke about before when it came to people that are not Catholic, that are pagans. Like with the example that you gave from Paul, that was a perfect one. You mentioned about how they have some truth, but they don't have the fullness of the truth. And I feel that it's the exact same thing with Protestants. They have the Bible, they have the scriptures, they know about Yeshua, they know about God, the triune God, but do they know about the sacraments? Do they know the truth, the fullness of the faith? Are they partaking of the bread of life, how he intended it to be taken? So, do you have a short
My
answer to that too?
my thing is this, like, because I have a question that was actually written by a Protestant, but I'm
Mm,
not gonna answer it right now. We'll get to it in a moment. But
right.
even with all due respect, and I'm not trying to be mean when I say this, I think you and I can relate to this because we were once evangelicals. Like,
Mhm.
we knew Jesus, but did we know the Jesus?
Mm,
That's the thing. Because
yes.
anyone can say I believe in Jesus,
Yep, yep.
but and to say that every Christian worships the same Jesus, I I have to laugh at this because that's absurd.
Right, right.
Why do you think if we worship the same Jesus, why in the name of all that is holy do we have an infinite amount of sects and counting claiming to be the true church of Christ?
Mm, that
Each
hurts.
with their own morals, each with their own truth, each with their
Mm,
own beliefs. So to say that every Christian believes in the same Jesus is absurd.
mm.
Even the most conservative of evangelicals understand that it's absurd.
No, yeah, I do
And
have to agree with
I
that.
do believe, and I'm not bashing on evangelicals when I'm saying when I'm telling this right now, because I do obviously have a certain amount of respect towards evangelicals. Not to say that I don't support Protestantism. Don't get me wrong, but at the same time, they do more work when it comes to preaching the gospel and evangelism than we do,
Yeah,
and that's depressing.
right. Yeah. One of the things that I want to add to that, and I don't want to go in a rabbit trail, but you have such a good point with the whole different Jesuses that get preached, and I know that to be so true because it, doing what I do on Instagram, talking about Catholicism from the Jewish perspective, a lot of people always ask me, man, with what you're saying, shouldn't it be so obvious to Jewish people that Jesus is the Messiah? Why don't they accept him? But I'm like, how can they possibly? When the majority of the Jesus, quote unquote, images that they receive are not even the true Jesus. They're getting the prosperity gospel Jesus. They're getting the I'm okay with all sin as long as you say you believe Jesus. They're getting the Jesus that is just buddy buddy and isn't actually demanding obedience to the commandments. So it's not really their fault. You see what I'm saying?
No, it's
It's
not.
Christians, like
And the thing is that most Jews, I'm not trying to be mean when I say this, but I think you can agree that most Jews are not practicing Jews.
that's also true. That's true.
And
But
so
all
when
that
they discover religion, they will pretty much accept almost anything that sounds remotely to what is truth, not to knock on them or anything.
mhm,
But if you notice that a lot of the Jewish converts, almost all of them, I think all of them have one thing when they convert to Catholicism, they all have one thing in common is that they knew their Jewish faith
mhm,
and they understood the parallels between Judaism and Catholicism and how they
right,
correlated, intertwine with one another.
right. Now, let me go into the next question before we get too carried away. This one is coming from Black Catholic Mama. She says, "Why isn't it
That's a
talked
dope
about?"
name.
Yeah,
That's a dope
dope,
name.
dope name, eh? So she's asking, "Why isn't it talked about? We should want more Catholics. Isn't that the truth? Like, shouldn't we want more Catholics? If we believe what we believe, if it's really truth, and again, the same way that, look, this goes both ways. You were just talking about how there are some Jewish people that aren't really necessarily living out the faith as it should be for a Jew, or not should be, rather, how religious Jews live.
Yes.
The same thing happens with Catholics. We have Catholics that are just nominal Catholics, they're not necessarily living out the faith. But even Catholics who are, I would say, living out the faith to the best of their ability, there's still a lot of them not evangelizing. Shouldn't we want more Catholics? That is the question. And
Well,
I mean, the answer to that is, of course, we should, and we should be doing that. And that's why Clyde and I are here today. So,
I want to add to that. I mean, we would love to, but there are especially individuals who have some influence in the church that tell people who are not Catholic that they don't have to convert. That happened to me.
yeah.
I think I mentioned this in one of Amber's live streams, and I was scandalized.
Mm,
I don't want to get into because it's a long story, but
mm-hmm,
when I was in the process of before I went to RCA, I was actually planning on going to RCA a lot earlier than expected because I would have converted back in 2016 instead of 2019. I was in some catechism classes, actually catechesis class, whatever, um, by a parish that was. I'm not going to mention the name of the parish because I don't want them to hunt me down. Um, Basically, what happened is that it felt very Protestant, the catechism classes that they offered, and it
mm,
didn't sound remotely Catholic to me. And so when I spoke to the deacon and priest, they told me, hey, isn't catechism class you're supposed to be teaching about what Catholicism is and potentially bring other people to the Catholic Church? And the deacon was like, well, we're not here to evangelize or convert people. We're just here to talk about Jesus.
oh my goodness gracious.
And I kid you not, I was scandalized and I walked out and never came back.
Man, I don't blame you. That that is one of the major things that bothers me. And it goes back to the point that we were talking about before about this whole view where ecumenism takes over and you're like, we're just going to listen to everybody and we're just going to be nice. Like, we'll say some things here and there, but we're not really trying to do anything real. Versus the Catholicism of St. Thomas, which is, I'm going to go to these nations and I'm going to bring them to Yeshua. Whew, man, I feel you. Let me go into the next question because I also want to get to your questions. Next one is coming from, and I'm gonna completely slaughter this because it's a strange spelling. Amaya Jeanette. Amaya Jeanette with like three E's. Anyway, where can you get Catholic evangelist materials?
Oh,
That I can't even
that's
answer.
that's a good. Well, their Catholic Answers is a good one. Your parish, if your parish in the bulletins that they have, if they happen to have any like pamphlets or something that explain the basic core tenets of the faith,
Hmm.
just grab several copies from them and start, passing them around. Um, there are different programs and different websites and organizations out there. You just have to look them up that offer material
Hmm.
to use for Catholic evangelism. But it's not to say it's hard to find. It's just like you don't see a lot of since you don't see a lot of Catholic outreach and stuff. You don't see like a lot of stuff that a lot of evangelicals put out. Because
Right.
you and I can both relate that they
Hmm.
have a lot of books, a lot of pamphlets. They have free Bibles that they pass out and stuff. Not
Yeah.
to say that we don't do that, but
Hmm. Right.
it is. I don't want, like I said, it's not difficult to find the resources to do that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
It's just you just have to figure out what kind of organizations actually offer those stuff.
Right. Yeah, and I think, like you mentioned, Catholic Answers is really good for that. And I like this book by Trent Horn that says "Why We're Catholic."
Oh
Um,
yeah.
it's a great book for evangelism, and I think um, for this person that asked it, and I'm not gonna try to say the name again because that was difficult to even get out. But the book by Trent Horn, "Why We're Catholic," you can find it over at Catholic Answers website is Catholic.com. It's a great book because it brings Catholicism not in a way where you're trying to push it on the person, but you're just giving them the fact in the way that actually brings them in, which is
Yep.
completely the opposite of saying, like, hey, we're Catholic, but you don't have to be Catholic. No, no. It brings it in a way where you're like, man, if I don't choose Catholicism, it's because I'm just silly. So let's go ahead and dive into the next question.
And before the
This,
next question, I
oh,
would
go
like
ahead.
to add that
Go ahead.
another way of evangelization is actually passing out books that were written by converts. Because
That's
if
true.
you that was one of the things that helped me convert because if you were to read material, any kind of material, or watch videos from converts, people that
Yeah.
converted to Catholicism, they not only explain why Catholicism is true, but they give their own perspective and their own backgrounds, and
Hmm.
you can relate to them in various different ways.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the great examples for that is Scott Hahn. And of course, as we mentioned
Grocery.
before, Keith Nestor. I think he's got a book called Catholic for Dummies or Catholicism for Dummies. That's another good resource right there. All right, let me go ahead and dive into the next one. This is by Cameron Butler 99. He says, "How do we evangelize nominal Catholics who just don't care about their faith?" I'll let you go first and then I'll give my take on
Oh,
that. They
I'm
don't care.
trying not to be. This is like it's almost 9 in the morning. I'm not trying to be rude or disrespectful, but if I oh I had actually have a
Oh.
post planned for something like that, but
Yeah,
I'll give
yeah.
you a little bit of a sneak peek.
Go ahead, go ahead.
Basically, what I would do. Well, first off, you have to understand one thing is that Catholics, especially Catholics in our generation, have adopted and soaked up so much of the dribble and nonsense of the secular world that, as we mentioned before, they really don't care about their faith and they view their truth as no different than other people's truths, or like they just stop practicing religion altogether. The problem with that, and I've always said this before, if you have a problem with what the Catholic Church teaches or you don't practice your faith, why do you call yourself Catholic?
Mm, you're right.
Just answer me
That
that
hurts.
question. Not you, but like
Yeah,
I'm
no, no, I get
speaking
it.
in general. Why do you belong to a religion that you have fundamental disagreements on?
That's true.
Instead of you calling yourself a Catholic, you're better off calling yourself a non-religious person, an atheist, or even an evangelical for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you have serious issues of what the church teaches, or if you simply don't want to believe in what the church teaches, then why are you still claiming to be Catholic?
Can
That's
I be honest
that's
with
not
you?
a. Go
I
ahead.
have an answer to that, and of course, it's the answer that they don't want to agree with. But and I'm sure this is the answer that you know that it is, and it's the fact that Catholicism has, unfortunately, after the '60s. I don't want to point to anything, but the fact is that since that point, a lot of people have kind of Protestantized themselves to the point where they think that Catholicism can also be taken to mean this and that, as opposed to what the Catholic is. And that's a huge mistake because the real truth of Catholicism and the beauty of it is that we don't get to choose whatever we want. The Catholic faith depends and is bound on what is known as the deposit of the faith. And though
Yep.
the faith can be expounded on throughout councils and documents of the church, through papal decrees, they're not bringing in something new out of the woodworks. They're basically expounding on the deposit of the faith. So you don't get to make up your own thing. And what you said is exactly right. You might as well be calling yourself an evangelical, a Protestant, because you are then, by rejecting the truths of the faith, just making up your own version of Christianity.
And anything that has been declared a dogma of faith, you have to believe in order to
Right.
be saved.
Yep.
Outside the church, there's no salvation. You must believe in the Immaculate Conception. You must believe that every human creature must be subject to the Roman Pontiff. You must believe in X, Y, and Z.
Mm-hmm.
Now, are there areas in theology that we can have a difference of opinion? Of course, we can.
Right.
But when it comes to things that have been dogmatically defined by the church to be believed by all, we cannot say that I do not want to believe in that.
Absolutely correct. Exactly. Exactly. Let me go ahead and dive into the next one. This one's by Theon underscore Johan. The role of charisms. Okay, sorry, I don't know why it took me so long to read that. The role of charisms slash spiritual gifts are quite important in evangelism. What is your take on this? I guess this kind of hints to what I mentioned before about the fact that, like, for some people, it's not necessarily quote unquote their calling to be out there preaching the gospel in the streets, like you know, like St. Thomas. You're not a street preacher necessarily. Maybe you're an introvert. Maybe you don't have the resources. Maybe you have a speech impediment. So did Moses. Anyway, um, all of that to say that, okay, there are people that perhaps are not going to be the street preacher type. But, Clyde, my question to you to answer this person, are there other ways other than just street preaching to promote and evangelize?
Your lifestyle.
Exactly. I mean,
And that's what I mentioned in the beginning,
correct.
that Catholics not did not just go out there and started preaching verbally to the people. And even when Europe was Catholic, even though you had strands of pagans out there, eventually many pagans, non-Catholics, ended up converting, not just through the preaching of the friars and the priests or listening to the sermons, but by the outward signs that they've noticed and the way of life that many Catholics were living in those times. And so, like you mentioned, not everyone has the charisma or the gifts, or not every. It's true, not everyone is called to be an evangelist. That's a fact.
Hmm.
However, that does not mean that people are not called to preach.
Right.
There are different methods and ways of preaching the gospel. When
Right.
people think of evangelism, they automatically mean you go out there and speak to people about Christ.
Right.
That's that's kind of like a generalization of what evangelism is, but that's really not it. When the early Christians were preaching the gospel through the known world during the first 300 years of the church, the word, yes, the preaching was one thing, but their conduct and their lifestyle was a completely different thing
Right.
they were able to convert many people, even the persecutors, not just to the words that they were saying, but also by their actions. And
Absolutely.
why do you think we have a lot of martyrs that were even
Yes.
persecutors of the church that ended up dying with the people that they were persecuting?
Hmm.
Because they noticed that their lifestyle, and not just their lifestyle, but the way that they're able to stand their ground and the way that they live their life goes to show that they were inspired and they were impressed by the people
Hmm.
that were viewed by almost the whole world as nothing more than a threat to society.
Mm. Wow. Man, this is deep, and I didn't want to keep going on
I'm
this.
sorry.
No,
I'm
no, no.
sorry.
It's just good. The problem is that every time you say something, you spark something more in my head. And I'm like, man, I wanted to make this short, but now I want to keep answering.
I have a tendency of doing that. I'm sorry.
uh, but look, when it comes to outreach, when it comes to evangelism, yes, a lot of people get the image of, okay, evangelism means going being a street preacher. Unfortunately, the reason why people have that image is because Protestants are using that technique, and they are the ones that are going being
They
loud
gave
about their
they give
faith.
street they give street preaching. I'm not trying to be mean when I say this, but especially to non-Christians out there,
Right.
they get scandalized, and I don't blame them for making fun of street preachers, because street preachers, especially nowadays, especially for the many past decades or something, they've been giving evangelism a bad name.
Well, yeah. So there's two things to that. Yes, they do give it a bad name, but at the same time, the reason again why people are they get that image is because of the fact that Protestants are at least, and I gotta give them that, regardless of the fact whether their technique is bad or good, which we can agree it's not so
Mhm.
good. The fact is that they're at least trying to do something. So that's why they get
At
the
least they're
image.
trying to preach, at least
Right.
say what they believe.
But going back to what you said, I think what matters most is the actions. Now, going back to, okay, at least they tried, but the reality is that it's not so good. Let's go take the good way of evangelism, how it used to be. And you said it again, you keep hitting the nail on the head. You said the fact is their actions speak louder than their words. What did Catholics do when they encountered the poor? They were giving money. They were not just screaming in a corner saying you're going to burn in hell. They were
No,
being Yeshua for the people. How? Feeding the poor, dressing the ones that were with lack of clothing. They were taking care of the orphans. That's why most orphanages around the world are Catholic. They were making hospitals. Look at all the hospitals around the world.
and
A
if
majority of them,
and if
what
you
are they?
Mhm.
You know?
Catholic, and if people have the audacity to say that the church has done nothing to society, let me tell you this:
Mm,
you do realize that a lot of almost everything that came from Western civilization was created by the Catholic Church or was inspired by the Catholic Church.
yeah.
If it wasn't for the Catholic Church, you wouldn't have the hospital systems that we have today. If it wasn't for the Catholic Church, you wouldn't have the university systems that we have today. If it wasn't for the Catholic Church, you wouldn't have various styles and forms of government or different types of methods of expression that we have today. So don't you dare say anyone that the Catholic Church has done nothing for society. And just as you mentioned, the church being acting like Christ has done more for the poor than any organization or any kind of society has ever existed.
Hmm. Absolutely
Just
true.
because just because you don't see the church doing something now, that doesn't mean that we're not doing anything now or we've never done anything in the past.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, we cannot say that it hasn't done anything in the past. Look, again, going back to the Japan example, where I live, there's Catholic churches, Catholic universities, Catholic hospitals.
Mhm.
All of these things are because the Catholic Church has had such a positive impact in a
Yep.
country that still considers itself completely unreligious. So, for the
Yeah.
ironies of ironies, the place that's so unreligious has such affect or has been affected in such a manner that you can see Catholicism still. Now,
Yeah.
we're gonna cut that one short there because we still got more questions.
Oh yeah.
Two main questions. That one that we're getting in from the comments here. This one was coming from Joseph Ages. No, sorry, that's wrong. Joseph Aggs. Let me see if I can find his original question so I can just post it up for the people. All right. So basically, what do you tell the Protestant who converted to being a Protestant that says that they never had a connection to the church and follow the same line of rejecting it that we all know? So he's asking about ex-Catholics that converted to Protestantism. How do we evangelize them? And another question that we got on Instagram is how to evangelize atheists. So what do you want to tackle first? You want to tackle atheists first
Um,
or ex-Catholics?
the the ex-Catholics ones, but the thing is, you've seen a lot of my posts tackling that,
Mm-hmm.
and I've gotten a lot of hate
Mm.
for. And like I said, I'm not going to apologize for what I've said with regards to people who claim to be former Catholics, but and now they became evangelicals, but they now um, are going ranting and how the church didn't do X, Y, and Z
Right.
to them. I made a lot of posts, and you're a witness to that.
Yeah.
But to summarize, you have no one else to blame but yourself.
Mm.
No one leaves the church because they found Jesus. You left the church because you either lacked faith in Christ or you never had faith in Christ to begin with.
Mm.
There is no excuse for anyone to leave Catholicism at all. I don't care how serious or whatever issue has happened to you in your life. That doesn't mean leaving the structure, leaving the institution that Christ founded as a means of salvation just because you got your feelings hurt does not give you the justification to do all that.
Can I jump on that real quick?
Go ahead.
This is big because it's a huge issue. And again, we live in a very PC culture. Everybody's sensitive. Everybody gets offended about anything. So you're right. And for the folks that don't know about Clyde's Instagram Latin Catholicism, you probably don't know, but he's tough because it's needed. But this is the reality. There's a lot of people that end up leaving the faith because of the fact that maybe they were offended by something that they heard or something that they experienced, or maybe they felt that they didn't know Christ until they found some Protestant church. This is the reality, and I'm speaking because I've been in both fields, and so has Clyde. The best way to put this is a quote. I don't even know who said this quote originally, but it goes something to the form of, it is ignorant Catholics become Protestants, and
I know,
educated
I
yeah,
know
and
the phrase.
educated Protestants become Catholics, right? So
Yep,
there's
that.
that quote, right? Or the one, for example, that says that a Protestant that dives into history will cease to be Protestant and become Catholic, something of that
To be
sort.
deep into history, to be is to cease to be a Protestant.
There
That
you
was
go.
said by Saint Cardinal Henry Newman.
There you go. There you go. So, in both of those cases, we see the fact that usually when you see somebody that says, I was Catholic for 50 years, as I've gotten, and I'm sure you've gotten in your comments as well, I was Catholic for 50 years and I never knew Christ, but now I know him. I have a personal relationship with him. I'm like, how more personal can you get than consuming the flesh of the Lamb of God? How more personal can you possibly get? There is no music, no vibes, countdowns and smoke and flashing lights. Nothing in this world compares to consuming the flesh of the Lamb of God.
And I wanted to add on that. And if, like I said, I'm not trying to be mean. And if you think I'm mean, then I'm sorry. Then tough luck. But have you noticed that a lot of the people that end up becoming evangelicals. Have you noticed that a lot of the atheists nowadays that claim that used to be, Christian, all used to be evangelicals?
Mm-hmm.
Have you noticed why? A lot of the reasons why that I have noticed this, because most of my friends are not Catholic and a lot of them are atheists or deists, is that when they notice the inconsistencies of what they think to be Christianity, because as you know, Protestantism as a collective whole, when I mean collective whole, I'm not necessarily talking about the individuals per se, but I'm talking about the beliefs. There is no consistent truth. Everything is subjective.
Right.
And when they view that subjectivism, they end up thinking, oh, if this is inconsistent, therefore this can't be true.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I go back to the Catholics, well, the former Catholics that end up becoming evangelicals, and they claim to have found Christ, and they get all emotional. And I'm not, like I said, I'm not trying to be mean when I say this, but
Right.
like when I ask these people, at what point in your life did you figure out Catholicism was that God somehow spoke to you and said Catholicism was false?
Mm-hmm.
I guarantee that wasn't speaking to you because probably at one moment in your life, you at one point in your life when you decided to leave the church to become an evangelical, you probably had some kind of moment in your life where you felt like something something's not right, and therefore you delve into a new form of religion that gives you the satisfaction, that gives you the dopamine rush in order to satisfy your cravings or to satisfy something that is empty inside of you.
Right. Right.
And another thing I want to mention and is with the whole it was just in the top of my mind and it just left my mind, but I think, yeah, I remember. It's the idea of, oh, I knew why, and sorry, I just remembered now.
Mm-hmm.
And when I point out, and when many Catholics point out to non-Catholics, um, that to former Catholics that are evangelical now, and that they claim to know about Catholicism, or in actuality they don't. And if you notice that they get really offended by this,
Mm-hmm.
and they say, "Oh, you've hurt my feelings." Well, no one really hurt your feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And if you feel like you were offended by what we told you when we called out the fact that you don't know anything about Catholicism, that's not you. You're only saying you're offended is because deep down inside, you know that what you're saying is completely inconsistent.
Mm-hmm.
Deep down inside, that's probably your conscience telling you that maybe what you thought that you claimed to know what Catholicism was is just
Yeah.
in the actuality your emotions getting the better of you.
Ooh, man. And let me just jump into that real quick with a comment that we have over by Ethan, who is tagged over here with your boy EB. Says there is a correlation between Protestantism and growing atheism. And then
Yes,
he also goes ahead and mentions that Protestant faith is very superficial because it is emotional and not full of submission to the intellect and will to Christ. And,
exactly.
and
Yes,
both of those things go to what you are saying now, which is people look, okay, this is another topic we got to dive into, which is like masculinity and
I need to write some of these topics down.
yeah,
I'm
like
sorry.
let's talk about Catholic masculinity. Let's just talk about masculinity in topic as in general. But when it comes to this, people are so emotional. And again, just like what Clyde said, this is not intended to offend people. If the truth offends, it offends, but it's not intended to hurt anybody on purpose. But the majority of the cases that I've encountered, because I've been there myself, is people equate this um, sort of emotional high that they feel to the Holy Spirit, for example. They feel like, I feel the Spirit. when they go to a Christian concert and you feel the vibes. Look, anybody
It's a
feels the
joke.
vibes. Everybody
Anyone.
feels right. Exactly. When you go to it,
We're not knocking
right.
evangelical music because there's a lot of good evangelical music, but
Agreed.
oh, that's
Agreed.
another topic. That's another topic we have
Yeah,
to get into. Oh
absolutely. And
gosh, no,
yeah, we have to dive into that too. It's not to knock on them. However, we've left logic. We've left logic. We've left reasoning. The intellect is nothing anymore. Everything that counts now is emotionally based. How I feel.
everything is
This is, and it goes back to the other comment that Ethan mentioned, which is the fact that there is a correlation between Protestantism and growing atheism. It's absolutely true because they are both centered in the self, which is
the self.
how do I feel? What do I identify as? What do I consider truth? What is my truth? Everything is so self centered, emotionally driven, that we
Mm,
naturally reject logic, reasoning,
yep.
intellect, the mind of Christ, and we dive into this world that leaves us anywhere and everywhere except for in the truth. And that's
And I
why
want to
that is
and I want to
interesting.
add on that. And have you? And one thing I've noticed, and someone pointed this out to me, so I take all the credit for this phrase. But this person, a follower of mine, told me when you see my stories where I break down the comments of
Yeah, yes.
evangelicals like
Yes.
one by one. One of my followers told me, and and I can't believe I didn't realize this till now, and it makes so much sense. And we were talking about atheism, Protestantism leading to atheism, eventually leading to atheism, is that the follower told me this, is that the concept of having a personal relationship with Jesus Christ will end up making Jesus Christ into an imaginary friend.
Ooh.
And you know what happens to imaginary friends, right? You
You
know
grow
when
out of
kids
them.
you grow out of them, and not just that, your imaginary friend can change. Your construct of your imaginary friend can change. Your belief in your imaginary friend can change. And as a kid, it's normal. But when you reduce Jesus Christ into nothing more than a personal relationship concept, you end up creating a Jesus Christ to your own imagining.
Right. Yeah. And when we do that, that's when we stop living the true relationship with Christ. Because we're not saying that you don't need a relationship with Christ, that you don't need to
We
have a
do.
personal. You obviously need it. I mean, that's why we consume Him every time that we're able to attend Mass, right? Except for me, because I'm not officially a, what do you call it? A confirmed Catholic. I'm still waiting for the moment, but don't
you're
worry, it's
Catholic.
coming.
You're Catholic in spirit. I'll give you
Amen.
that.
Amen. And I'm on the way. But with all of these things being said, it, it is important to reach out to our Protestant ex-Catholic friends, um, because the fact is that they've unfortunately been deceived by the God of the self, the God of the emotions. That also answers the whole question about how to approach atheists, which is just being factual, using logic, using reasoning, because it still works.
Morality.
Yeah, right.
Morality.
Using morality. This is something that you and I were talking about before actually going live. We were talking about the fact that morality, using that as the basis of your apologia, is so effective because it transcends religion, quote unquote, and it goes into every field because everybody, whether they agree, that there is one set form of morality, everybody is affected by it. So you can approach logically in the realm of morality, and that will help you address people that are Protestants, people that are atheists. All of these things are covered within that section.
Mhm.
Now, hold on, I think I'm just looking through the comments real quick. But did you have any other questions from your Instagram? Because mine are
Oh, I
gone.
do.
All right, let's
Oh,
take a
I
couple
do.
of yours. I think we're only gonna have like 9 more minutes because it's super late over here. But let's kind of
That,
do what we call over when I'm with Gabriel. We call it the what is it? Lightning round.
Mm-hmm. All right.
That's probably gonna be impossible for us, but let's try our best.
I'll give you two because I have a lot. How to evangelize the people who have put up a wall and turned off by the church.
Okay, so this kind of
I know that it's a vague question, but we can probably, by putting a wall up, I can probably presume maybe you have been scandalized
mm-hmm.
and of short and other stuff. But what would you have to say about that?
It goes back to that response that I got before from Roy Schumann. As I said, he said, "I go where God is." One thing that people don't seem to understand is the fact that Christ is perfect and he is the head of the church. But the church, the body itself, is composed of imperfect people, and people will fail. It doesn't mean that the head is corrupt or that the head is wrong. The church is the church, it's the bride of Christ. However, we're not saints yet. So, because of that, we have to understand that there are times where we're going to encounter a priest that did something wrong, a brother, a sister, a father, a mother that are going to not be living out the faith. The funny thing is that a lot of people want to play the blame game and say, hey, look at what that priest did. Look at what I saw in the news. I'm scandalized. But take a look at yourself. How have you been living? Are you being saintly? And most of the time, the response is going to be no. I'm
No.
not being saintly. I am in sin. I'm in deep trouble. And you shouldn't feel terrible about it. You should be glad that you're in the church as a broken person because this is the place where you can come to be healed. So, anyway, go ahead.
One other I would like to add on that is that Christ promised that he will be with his church through the end of time, until the end of
Right.
time, but he never promised that the people that will rule his church will be perfect and sinless human beings.
Right.
You have to understand that we do not have the reason why we have a lot of bad things that are happening that have happened in the church is because of original sin and because we have sinful human beings in positions of authority. And you cannot also say that, oh, we have priests and bishops that have done terrible things to the youth. I'm not going to mention the terrible, immoral crimes that they've done because you probably know what it is. But you can't say, oh, these people have done this, therefore the Catholic Church is not true, or that I shouldn't belong to this institution, and therefore it's intrinsically evil. Well, by that logic, you're basically saying that you shouldn't go to the hospital because there are bad doctors out there.
Mm.
You shouldn't when you go to court, you shouldn't have a lawyer because we have corrupt people in the law firm. We shouldn't practice business or you shouldn't do any business type of negotiations because we have a lot of people in the business world that do shady practices.
Mm.
You see where I'm getting at?
Right.
You can't presume that the entire entity or the entire organization is intrinsically evil just because you have a few bad apples.
Right. Absolutely.
So if people are going to be put off from the church because of a few bad people and just say, I don't want to convert to Catholicism, again, we've never forced anyone to convert to Catholicism at all.
Mm-hmm.
We've never done that.
Mm-hmm.
But when people go down to the route of, I don't want to convert because of bad individuals and therefore the structure is somehow bad, they're viewing the church as merely as just a human institution.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly
They're
it.
not really looking at the church for what it really is. Now, I'm not faulting the people for not viewing the church, as it really should be. Not all, but there are those individuals out there that should know better.
Right.
And if you think that the church is somehow evil, like I said, because of bad individuals, even the very apostles were not perfect.
Right. Wow.
Every century of the church, you're going to have a Judas. You're never going to escape the fact that you're going to have Judases in the church.
Yep. Well, not even Judas himself only. I'm putting here a quote by Saint Charbel, miracle worker, that says, "Peter denied Christ, Thomas doubted when he resurrected, and Jesus shows those men he knew that they were human and sinners." So, I mean, that's exactly what we're talking about. But go ahead, dive into the next question you got, and I think that'll be the last one for the
That'll
night.
be the last one. This this is the question. Um, is there value in Protestant evangelistic efforts? The question is somewhat vague, but I think I know what this individual is saying.
Mm,
Basically, I think he's basically saying to me and to you, do you see any value in Protestants evangelizing? In other words, do you feel like what they're doing is good?
mm,
And now I can answer that two ways.
mm,
One, I appreciate the fact that evangelicals do a lot of evangelistic work, and I appreciate the fact that they, have the audacity to go out there and do a lot of things that I wish we do.
right.
However, that does not mean that the gospel you're preaching to people is the objective truth.
Right.
Because the way I see it is that what evangelicals are preaching, well, objectively, they're preaching a gospel, but not the gospel.
Mm,
They're preaching more or less their personal views and opinions and their personal philosophy to people and ask them to accept their personal views and philosophies.
mm-hmm,
So I cannot say in good conscience that Protestant evangelism is inherently good because I cannot say with full honesty that what these people are preaching is authentic Christianity because it's not.
right.
And again, I'm not trying to be mean here. I'm speaking from experience because I used to be an evangelical for 21 years of my life.
Right.
And I'm not knocking on people, evangelicals, that do a lot of missionary work and stuff. I commend you to a certain degree that you do those kinds of things. But at the same time, I'm not going to say that what you're preaching to the people is authentic Christianity. I
Right.
simply cannot say that.
Right. I mean, for me, I guess I could say the exact same thing that you're saying, which is at least they're going out there. At least they have the guts, the chutzpah to actually go out there and do what they're doing. But the reality is that a lot of the time it's not the true message, right? It's not the true Yeshua. This goes back to what I was talking about before about Jewish people who get accused of, can't you see that Jesus is the Messiah? When in fact they're being taught about like 30 different Yeshuas, one Jesus, and three Jesuses, and one Jesus. You get what I mean? Like, they're just getting bombarded with all these different messages and who is the real one. Um,
And I
but
like the comment from your boy EB. I like that user. He says it's like a football player who catches the ball and runs the wrong way and gets the touchdown for the other team, generally thinking that they're doing well. Good
ooh,
intentions, but inherently bad.
yeah, yeah,
Ooh.
that's exactly what I was thinking
And,
when you were talking,
and,
man.
pe-
That's
and
such
people think I'm harsh. That was a good one.
that really was really good. Hey, yeah, so there is the good intention, but good intentions aren't everything. And we can witness to that with the way the culture runs right now. When people are like, let's be tolerant, let's be inclusive. When in reality, it ends up most of the time being the exact opposite of what its supposed intended goal was to be. So this is what we see in these cases as well. Although I can't say that it's always a misfire, because at least for me, it allowed me to love Scripture, for example, to
Yep.
love prayer, and to love God. That then led me to wanting to get closer to God, which
Yep.
led me to embrace my Jewishness and then dive into Messianic Judaism and Orthodox Judaism. But then that led me to Catholicism. So all of that, I mean, I guess indirectly kind of led me to where I am now. But you can't say that that's going to happen to everybody. That's the problem with
Nope.
it. The safe fire way to go about this is to evangelize as Catholics, being, like Clyde mentioned before, strategic by using either arguments of morality, which seem to be um, the best way to capture a general public, but then also being educated in a way that's gonna reach specific people. And I think Saint Charbel Miracle Worker said something really good about this. Let me see if I can find a comment. Um, hold on. Yeah, he said this. Answering to Johan said, we have to participate in parish life and educate ourselves and not be expected to be spoon fed. So we have to learn some apologia. It doesn't matter if you're planning to be an evangelist for the Catholic Church and go out there and reaching souls. I'm not saying everybody has to become a martyr, but
No.
we have to be ready to defend the faith, as we're told by the Saint Peter. We are supposed to be living holy. We need to partake of the sacraments, frequent them, and we need to not be lazy people that just stay there thinking that it's okay to not offend people just for the sake of not offending people. If the truth offends, it has to do it. But at the end of the day, don't do it to offend, do it to reach the souls. All right.
And I want to add one thing before we
Yeah,
finish.
go ahead.
And to the individuals out there that claim that we are being offensive to the individuals or insulting them, the only way we be insulting them is if we were to character assassinate these individuals and say
Right.
things about them that are not true. So if you feel that the way that I speak about Catholicism or the way that Daniel speaks about Catholicism or Amber, Gabriel, or whoever out there think, and if you think that their methods are somehow hurting your feelings, you need to re-examine your conscience
Mm.
because from what I've been seeing, they don't. And I mention these individuals because we know them personally, and I'm also giving them shout outs.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
if from what I see, they're not saying things to be mean. The
Right.
only reason why you feel offended is probably because deep down inside, they said something that resonated in you, and deep down, you're trying to combat
Mm. Exactly.
that. That's why you feel offended,
Hmm.
not because of what the individual said that supposedly attacked and hurt your feelings. No, it's because they pointed out something that was you knew that you didn't realize it was an inconsistency.
Hmm.
And if you feel that I somehow offended you today, then I'm sorry.
Mm.
As far as I know, I haven't done or said anything that a character assassinated or made generalizations to anyone,
Right.
because that would be the sin of calumny.
Hmm. I think you're clear. I don't think you've actually said anything that's directly offended. And again, just like for our friends that you mentioned, none of us, when we're out there being harsh, none of us, and I can speak because I know you guys, like we talk pretty much every week with Gabriel, with
Every other week.
yourself, with Amber, right? Like we know that we're not trying to be offensive. We all have good intentions, which is to bring the fullness of the truth to people. Of course, sometimes people, again, we live in a time where people get offended about anything. But the point is just doing it with the right intentions. But now it's time to go ahead and close this live stream, folks, because right now it is very late here in Japan and it is time for Clyde to get his day started. He's going to go
I
ahead and go
actually want to
for a
go back
run.
to sleep.
I'm over here saying you're gonna go for a run. You're like, I'm gonna go back to sleep. Oh my goodness gracious. All right. Clyde, I just want to go ahead and thank you for being here with us today. Thank you for taking time out of your morning. And I want to thank everybody else who has participated with great questions, great comments, for having your conversations down there. Clyde, do you have any last messages, any plugs you want to make, how people can reach you, how they can support you, anything like that? Go ahead.
Before I give myself a self promotion, I would like to say just one thing. If you respond and cooperate with the graces that God has given you or will give you, I guarantee you that He will lead you through to the truth. That's how He led me. That's how He led Daniel. That's how He led many people who seek what they want in their life. And as I mentioned, even though what we say may sound harsh, we're speaking from experience.
Hmm.
So you can't say, well, what we're basically doing is somehow being mean or being disrespectful, because we're not. Because if we were doing these things, we'd be our own self hypocrites. And so at the end of the day, if you're someone that is seeking the fullness of the faith, the fullness of the truth, or is seeking objective truth, I guarantee you that no other religion other than Catholicism can give you all the answers that you need.
Right.
And on top and up and another note, and if anyone here wants to reach out to me or wants to figure out what I do, you can follow me over at Latin Catholicism. You can also follow me over at Catholic Theology, and you can also follow me over at Catholic Connect. Even though I do not run the big official page of Catholic Connect, I run the Spanish page of Catholic Connect. So if you are Hispanic and want to see some Spanish content, feel free to follow the Spanish site of Catholic Connect, Spanish page of Catholic Connect, which is Catholic Connect underscore yes. But if you want to talk to me specifically, follow me over at Latin Catholicism.
Excellent. All right, Clyde, once again, I just want to go ahead and thank you for your time and for this great conversation. I hope that everybody that's watching right now would go ahead and support Clyde by giving him a follow. And definitely, at least you need to follow Latin Catholicism. That's my favorite way to stay in communication with my boy over here. But thank you everybody for watching this. Also, make sure to follow me on the Jewish Catholic so you can partake. Send in your questions as we let people know when we're gonna be making videos, when we're gonna be working together. We still have another video that's going to be on the way. That's gonna be a three-person video. We're gonna figure out how to do this between myself. We're gonna have Clyde and we're gonna have Gabriel. Maybe one day we'll have other friends, but for now, just make sure to follow us on Instagram. Make sure you give this video a thumbs up if it was a blessing for you. Thank you for everybody that was able to stick around. Have a blessed week. Shalom.